Chapter 2, I don't know how long this video is going to be. I have set a timer for 30 minutes. I know it's not going to be longer than that, and if I need to break up chapter 2, I will. This is a little bit different view than what you saw last time because this is not my Kindle. I am going to highlight some stuff as we go through. I'm not going to annotate the way I normally annotate, but it might give you at least some idea of what I talked about in class, especially if you're an honors student. So just bear with me. I'm going to read the whole page at one time, and then at the end of the page, I am going to stop. Look, I'll make myself a little line and go over the page to try and make it flow and maybe move faster. Maybe I won't stop as much, okay? So, the chapter 2, the little shop window. It still lacked half an hour of sunrise when Miss Hepzibah Pyncheon, we will not say awoke, it being doubtful whether the poor lady had so much as closed her eyes during the brief night of midsummer, but at all events arose from her solitary pillow, and began what it would be mockery to term the adornment of her person. Far from us to be the indecorum of assisting, even in imagination, at a maiden lady's toilet. Our story must therefore await Miss Hepzibah at the threshold of her chamber, only presuming meanwhile to note some of the heavy sighs that labored from her bosom with little with little restraint as to their lugubrious depth and volume of sound, inasmuch as they could be audible to nobody, save a disembodied listener like ourselves. The old maid was alone in the old house, alone, except for a certain respectable and orderly young man, an artist in the daguerreotype line, who, for about 3 months back, had been a lodger in a remote gable. Quite a house by itself indeed, with locks, bolts, and oaken bars on all the intervening doors. Inaudible, consequently, were poor Miss Hepzibah's gusty sighs. Inaudible the creaking joints of her stiffened knees as she knelt down by the bedside, and inaudible too by mortal ear, but heard with all-comprehending love and pity in the farthest heaven, that almost agony of prayer, now a whispered, now a groan, now a struggling silence, wherewith she besought the divine assistance through the day. Evidently, this is to be a day of more than ordinary trial to Miss Hepzibah, who, for above a quarter of a century gone by, has dwelt in strict seclusion, taking no part in the business of life, and just as little in its intercourse and pleasure. Not with such Not with such fervor praise the torpid recluse, looking forward to the cold, sunless, stagnant calm of a day that is to be like innumerable yesterdays. Okay, so really quickly, we have two characters. You got Miss Hepzibah Pyncheon. She's essentially our main character. There are other characters that will play pivotal roles, but she's like who the story centers around. Hopefully, you notice that there's kind of a lot of negativity around her. She's described as an old maid. What else? She's a recluse, meaning that she is a hermit. She doesn't have anything to do with the outside world. And I would actually note that aspect as a plot point, that she has dwelt in strict seclusion, taking no part in business of life and just as little in the intercourse of pleasure, meaning she doesn't even go visit friends or go to parties. She literally cuts herself off and has been from the outside world for a while. This opening part at the beginning, just to clarify about the ladies' toilet, that's not referencing an actual toilet. That's an old school term for just her being in the bathroom and getting dressed, putting on, well, what would deem for makeup at the time. They didn't have makeup like we think of today, but what would pass for doing her makeup, doing her hair. Of course, Hepzibah herself even kind of considers it like a labored effort. So you get this idea that both Hepzibah and the narrator view her, I mean, they see her as ugly, or she's depicted as maybe not ugly. I would say plain. She's not pretty. She's constantly referenced as kind of like this tragic, sad character. Okay? Continuously. Not just here. I mean, she's an old maid. That's kind of a very negative term at that time. It's negative now, but definitely then. Your other character that you see in this, the other aspect that you see with it, is that there's another person living in her house. An orderly young man who is a daguerreotypist. A daguerreotypist is somebody who is involved in what would be considered the art of photography. Photography was a new thing, right? Think those old-timey, like, big cameras where the guy stood behind the camera and put a blanket over his head and pressed a button and the bulb went, you know? It's like that kind of daguerreotype work. And so it was considered an art. So that's what this guy did. He's lived there for, what does it say? About 3 months. So he's lived in the house for about 3 months. He does live in his own section of the house. It's a remote gable. So he doesn't, his room, or rooms as they might have referred to him at that time, is not close to Hepzibah's rooms. So he doesn't hear her groaning and sighing and going through all the process of getting dressed. Ultimately, Hepzibah is in agony. And she's praying to the divine being that something go right for her. You don't really know what's wrong, but you will learn pretty soon what's wrong with her. Will she now issue forth over the threshold of her story? Not yet. By many moments. First, every drawer. So he's backing up. He's like, wait a minute. This is a little bit ironic, right? He said he wasn't going to tell you what she was doing in the bathroom. But yet, here he tells you. Not in detail, but yeah. First, every drawer in the tall, old-fashioned bureau, this is like a dresser, is to be opened with difficulty, and with a succession of spasmodic jerks, then all must close again with the same fidgety of reluctance. There is a rustling of stiff silk, a tread of backward and forward footsteps to and fro across the chamber. We suspect Miss Hepzibah, moreover, of taking a step upward into a chair in order to give heedful regard to her appearance on all sides, and at full length in the oval, dingy, framed toilet glass. I know I said I wasn't going to stop it, but here all she's doing is she's standing on a chair to look at herself fully in a mirror, right? Girls do this. Girls still do things like this. She wants to see her full appearance. But again, you have this continuous, like, kind of tragic aspect around her because the mirror that she's looking in is dingy and old. Everything is decaying. Hepzibah herself, everything's old, okay? That hangs above her table. Truly, well indeed, who would have thought it? Is all this precious time to be lavished on the matutinal repair and beautifying of an elderly person? This word just means mourning. Yeah, we don't use it anymore. Who never goes abroad, whom nobody ever visits, and from whom, when she shall have done her utmost, it were the best charity to turn one's eyes another way. So he literally says she's ugly. Okay, if not, I mean, maybe that's an extreme, but he really kind of does. Okay, he says here that she does all of this in the morning, this matutinal repair in the morning to make herself beautiful, right? She does tell you that she's old, okay, but that's relative. Old back then would have been 30s, okay? But he also, like, then goes on and it's like she never goes anywhere. Nobody ever visits her. And if people see her, the kindest thing that they could do is look away. So, yeah, this is kind of like sad. Okay. Now she is almost ready. Let us pardon her one other pause, for it is given to the soul sentiment, or we might better say heightened and rendered intense, as it has been by sorrow and seclusion, to the strong passion of her life. We heard the turning of a key in a small lock. She has opened a secret drawer of an escritoire and is probably looking at a certain miniature done in Malbone's most perfect style. That's this. That's what this is. The miniature. It's a picture. They're talking about a photo. And representing a face worthy of no less delicate a pencil. It was once our good fortune to see this picture. It is a likeness of a young man in a silken dressing gown of an old fashion. So I am definitely going to highlight this, okay? Obviously, there's some kind of mystery around this, right? It's hidden. She doesn't keep it up. It is a drawing, not like a true photograph. Keep in mind, photography was a new thing, right, at this time. But I'm definitely going to highlight and make a note of it because I think that this could be, well, most likely, I feel like it could be referenced in the future. It does say that at some point people might have seen this picture. It's a likeness of a young man in a silken dress or dressing gown of old fashion, the soft richness of which is well adapted to the countenance of reverie. So you definitely have an idea here. Besides it being a plot point, I would also say, hold on, that if I was going to look at this analytically, if I can get it to work, come on. There's a lot going on here. You have this idea of this aristocrat, okay? If I can spell. AKA rich, non-working person. It's old though, right? It's old-fashioned, but it was rich. You've got silken, soft richness. It was revered, all that good stuff. It's like she's looking back and longing for this old time period. Longing for this old aristocratic life that she had, with its full tender lips and beautiful eyes that seemed to indicate not so much capacity of thought as gentle and voluptuous emotion. Of the possessor of such features, we shall have a right to ask nothing except that he would take the rude world easily and make himself happy in it. Can it have been an early lover, Miss Hepzibah? I love how our narrator makes these conjectures, right? I will say, if I was in your shoes, I probably would do a highlight for our narrator. It won't let me add anymore, so we'll just go with green. For moments when our narrator talks to us, because, you know why? No, she never had a lover. Poor thing. How could she? Nor ever knew by her own experience what love technically means. And yet, her undying faith, trying to get it to go, and trust, her fresh remembrance and continual devotedness towards the original of that miniature have been the only substance of her heart to feed upon. So her life has centered around looking back on this memory, and it sustained her, right? H's life. I think I just turned my pen off. There we go. Has centered around this memory. Which again, kind of sad. Okay? She seems to have put aside the miniature and is standing again before the toilet glass. There are tears to be wiped off. Wow, yeah, so it really affects her. So probably something tragic, okay? As a matter of fact, I probably would do this way. A few more footsteps to and fro, and here at last, with another pitiful sigh, like a gust of chill, damp wind out of a long closed vault, the door of which has accidentally been set ajar, here comes Miss Hepzibah Pyncheon. Forth she steps into the dusky, time-darkened passage, a tall figure clad in black silk with a long and shrunken waist, feeling her way towards the stairs like a nearsighted person, as in truth she is. So if you are keeping up with anything, you should definitely keep up with major characterization When a character's description is given, it's important. This is important. There's a lot told about her just in this single moment. Of course, we learn that she can't see good. However, this could be symbolic, right? The idea of not just literally not being able to see, but figuratively not being able to see. We also learned that other aspects of her, she's tiny, not super well fed. I know that seems dumb, but at the time period, that is definitely a sign of her not being too well off. Okay? Ironically, could explain why she was looking back on the idea of being an aristocrat so fondly. You have this idea that she's almost in a sense of mourning, and that the house itself reflects this idea that it's dark and it's closed in, and she too has this same dark, closed in aspect about her. The sun, meanwhile, if not already, come on, pen. I keep turning it off. If not already above the horizon, was ascending nearer and nearer to its verge, meaning it's rising, right? A few clouds floating high upward caught some of the earliest light and threw down its golden gleam on the windows of all the houses in the street, not forgetting the house of Seven Gables, which many such sunrises as it had witnessed looked cheerfully at the present one. The reflected radiance served to show pretty distinctly the aspect and arrangement of the room which Hephzibah entered after descending the stairs. It was a low studded room, with a beam across the ceiling, paneled with dark wood and having a large chimney piece, set round with pictured tiles, but now closed by an iron fireboard, through which ran the funnel of a modern stove. There was a carpet on the floor, originally of rich texture. Again, you have this idea that not anymore, but they were. There's this past richness, but so worn and faded in these latter years that its once brilliant figure had quite vanished into one indistinguishable hue. In the way of furniture, there were two tables, one constructed with perplexing intricacy and exhibiting as many feet as a centipede, the other most delicately wrought, with 4 long and slender legs, so apparently frail that it was almost incredible what a length of time the ancient tea table had stood upon them. Half a dozen chairs stood about the room, straight and stiff, so ingeniously contrived for the discomfort of the human person that they were irksome even to the sight. So again, you have this house, like the house itself, it almost reflects, like, maybe not Hephzibah, but this feeling, okay? This feeling of this everything being irksome, meaning like uncomfortable, old, run down, all that kind of stuff goes along, and the house just continuously reflects it. Obviously, if you haven't picked up on the fact that the house is also symbolic, you should, okay? It conveyed the ugliest possible idea of the state of society to which they could have been adapted. One exception there was, however, in a very antique elbow chair, with a high back carved elaborately in oak and a roomy depth within its arms that made up by its spacious comprehensiveness for the lack of any of those artistic curves which abound in a modern chair. So there's like one chair in the whole room that's actually really comfortable and nice. As for ornamental articles of furniture, this means like stuff that's just added into the room for appearance and to make it more pretty, or to make it prettier, sorry, you wouldn't say more pretty, to make it prettier, more comfortable, that kind of stuff. We recollect but two, if such they may be called. One was a map of Pinchin territory at the eastward, not engraved, but the handiwork of some skillful old draughtsman, and grotesquely illuminated with pictures of Indians and wild beasts, among which was seen a lion. The natural history of the region being as little known as its geography, which was put down most fantastically awry. The other adornment, so these are the two things in the room that the house is adorned with or decorated with in this bedroom. Anyway, right? One was a map. The other was the portrait of old Colonel Pynchon. You should remember both of these aspects from the opening chapter, so I'm not going to go way back in it. This is the land that the Pynchons believed that they deserved, but they lost, right? This is the portrait that was hanging over Colonel Pynchon when they found him dead. At 2/3 length, representing the stern features of puritanic-looking person in a skull cap with a laced band and a grizzly beard, holding a Bible with one hand, and in the other, uplifting an iron sword hilt. There's a lot of irony in this. On one hand, he's super religious. On the other hand, he's killing folks, right? So, dangerous. The latter object, being more successfully depicted by the artist, stood out in a far greater prominence than the sacred volume. So the sword itself actually takes precedence in the picture. This again tells you a lot about our colonel. Face to face with this picture on entering the apartment, Miss Hepzibah Pynchon came to a pause, regarding it with a singular scowl, a strange contortion of the brow which, by people who did not know her, would probably have been interpreted as an expression of bitter anger and ill will. But it was no such thing. She in fact felt a reverence for the pictured visage, of which only a far descended and time-stricken virgin could be susceptible. And this forbidding scowl was the innocent result of her near-sightedness. So yes, you do have this idea of her near-sightedness being symbolic. She reveres this photo. She looks highly positively upon it. This idea that the author implies that she's near-sighted, okay, and that she feels this reverence, but the reverence is because she has no understanding. This is not what you think. This means she's innocent. She has no understanding of the guy. She doesn't have any real connection to Colonel Pynchon. She only knows him through this photo. It's a long time ago. He's from a long time ago. He's far descended her. He's way back in the past. So she looks at this photo and reveres it. But she doesn't have any real understanding of who that guy is or what that photo represents. Anyway, and an effort so to concentrate her powers of vision as to substitute a firm outline of the object instead of a vague one. We must linger a moment on this unfortunate expression of poor Hepzibah's brow, her scowl. He talks about this a lot. It's heavily connected to her. As the world, or such part of it as sometimes caught a transitory glimpse, meaning like a sideways glimpse, passing by glimpse, of her at the window, wickedly persisted in calling it, her scowl had done Miss Hepzibah a very ill office, meaning her facial expression. Okay, I know y'all have heard the term resting. I'm not going to say the bad word, but you know what I mean. You've heard the term resting bee face, right? You've heard that? Okay? It's that kind of idea. Her facial expression kind of is negative all the time, but it's this actual resting scowl. That's what we're going to call it, okay? Because we're not using curse words. It's this actual resting scowl that the town has kind of judged her off of. Of course, they don't have any way to judge her because she's a recluse. She doesn't have anything to do with them. But it's caused the town to see her as an ill-tempered old maid. Nor does it appear improbable that, by often gazing at herself in a dim-looking glass and perpetually encountering her own frown with its ghostly fear, she had been led to interpret the expression almost as unjustly as the world did. So she, too, doesn't like it. How miserably cross I look, she must often have whispered to herself, and ultimately have fancied herself so by a sense of inevitable doom. But her heart was never frowned. It was naturally tender, sensitive, and full of little tremors and palpitations, all of which weaknesses it retained, while her visage was growing so perversely stern, and even fierce. So there's a heavy irony here, and you only see it in brief moments. Up till now, the author's been pretty negative about her. She has been negative about her. Again, she's pictured as this sad, tragic little person. But in this moment, there is a shift. Only brief. Right, wrong, highlighter. He says that her heart never frowned and that it was naturally tender, sensitive, and full of little tremors and palpitations. Okay? And that essentially, think about what he's saying here, right? She's really sensitive. She's really tender, meaning she's not overly strong. She's portrayed as weak, but I wouldn't say like in a negative light. It's almost like what you would look at like a little kid, like that whole, oh, poor baby thing, right? But regardless, because of this weakness, because she's tender, because she's sensitive, it's caused her to grow more stern and even more fierce, which is a great irony. Okay? Nor had Hephzibah ever any hardihood, except what came from the very warmest nook in her affections. She keeps it all to herself. All this time, however, we are loitering, meaning like hanging out faint-heartedly on the threshold of our story. In very truth, we have an invincible reluctance to disclose what Miss Hephzibah Pynchon was about to do. It has already been observed that in the basement story of the gable fronting on the street, an unworthy ancestor nearly a century ago had fitted up a shop. Ever since the old gentleman retired from trade and fell asleep under his coffin lid, not only the shop door but the inner arrangements had been suffered to remain unchanged. So I'm going to highlight this, but only to reference. I'll probably erase it, only to reference what we're talking about here. This was from the first chapter, right? Hopefully you remember it, but it was only briefly mentioned. He's talking about the fact that one of her ancestors opened a shop inside the house. I mentioned in the first chapter that would have been heavily looked down upon because they're aristocrats and they weren't supposed to work. The shop up until this point has remained unchanged, but it also hasn't been messed with. It's just gathered, while the dust of ages gathered inch deep over the shelves and counter and partly filled an old pair of scales, as if it were of value enough to be weighed. So he's telling you that the shop, don't forget about the shop, it's been down there all this time, closed up. If you had to take a guess, which hopefully you can guess, what our lovely Hephzibah is about to do, right? It treasured itself up, too, in the half-open till where there still lingered a base sixpence. That's just a small amount of money. This is not gonna be a legit translation, okay? We'll just call it a penny, a measly penny, worth neither more nor less than the heredity pride which had here been put to shame. So our narrator is heavily dogging this. I wouldn't necessarily even say this is a plot point. I would question whether or not our narrator is being ironic or not here, being sarcastic. I would definitely say he is, but I wouldn't fully call that yet. I would hold out that judgment before I made it. I'd see how the story goes along. Such had been the state and condition of the little shop in old Hephzibah's childhood, when she and her brother used to play at hide-and-seek in its forsaken precincts. So it had remained until within a few days past. But now, though the shop window was still closely curtained from the public gaze, a remarkable change had taken place in its interior. The rich and heavy festoons of cobweb, which it had cost a long ancestral succession of spiders their life's labor to spin and weave, had been carefully brushed away from the ceiling. Again, you should start to make a guess at what Hepzibah is about to do. She has removed the spider webs from the ceiling. The counter, shelves, and floor had all been scoured, and the latter was overstrown with fresh blue sand. Been scoured means cleaned, like scrubbed. The brown seals, too, had evidently undergone rigid discipline in an unveiling effort to rub off the rust, which had, alas, had eaten through and through their substance. So they'd eaten through the rust of like the hinges and the metal portions in the door and in the shop. Neither was the little old shop any longer empty of merchantable goods, meaning there's stuff in there that you can sell, right? It's no longer empty. A curious eye, privileged to take an account of stock and investigate behind the counter, would have discovered a barrel, yea, 2 or 3 barrels and a half ditto, one containing flour, another apples, and a third, perhaps, Indian meal, which we still like corn flour. There was likewise a square box of pine wood full of soap and bars, also another of the same size, in which were tallow candles, 10 to the pound, a small stock of brown sugar, some white beans and spilt peas, and a few other commodities of low price, and such as are constantly in demand, made up the bulkier portion of the merchandise. So essentially, this is just a rundown of what is going to be for sale in the shop, right? Basically, household items. Think of it kind of like maybe like a dollar store, a thrift store, a general store, or a Dollar General store, that kind of thing. They're not going to carry everything, but it's a quick, easy shop right around the corner. You can run in and buy you some flour or some apples or whatever you might need. It might have been taken for ghostly or phantasmagoric reflections of the old shopkeeper pension's shabbily provided shelves, save that some of the articles were of a description and outward form which could hardly have been known in his day. This word, phantasmagoric, just means ghostly. For instance, there was a glass pickle jar filled with fragments of Gibraltar rock. Not, indeed, splinters of the veritable stone foundation of the famous fortress, but bits of delectable candy. Okay, so I won't go into this. This is religious, but essentially this is a reference to the Bible and the Gibraltar rock within the Bible. But it's actually not that. At the time period, this is like rock candy. I don't know if you've ever had rock candy. It's that. Neatly done up in white paper. Jim Crow, moreover, was seen executing his world-renowned dance in gingerbread. He was a character that was used at the time. Obviously, he's very negatively looked at now. But these are like gingerbread cookies. Think of them as like little gingerbread men, okay, at the time. A party of laden dragoons were galloping along one of the shelves in equipments and uniforms of modern cut, and there were some sugar figures with no strong resemblance to the humanity of any epoch. Again, this word means era. You should have picked it up from the last time. Era. Or time period. But less unsatisfactorily representing our own fashions than those of 100 years ago. Another phenomenon, still more strikingly modern, was a package of lucifer matches, which, in old times, would have been thought actually to borrow their instantaneous flame from the nether fires of Tophet. In short, to bring the matter at once to a point, it was incontrovertibly evident that somebody had taken the shop and fixtures and long retired and forgotten Mr. Pinchen and was about to renew the enterprise of that departed worthy with a different set of customers, meaning someone is about to open the shop. Obviously, I feel like you can guess who that someone is going to be, right? Who could this bold adventurer be? And of all places in the world, why had he chosen the house of Seven Gables as the scene of his commercial speculations? This right here is super ironic and tells a lot about the time period and gender roles. So our narrator automatically goes to the idea of the person opening the shop being a male because women didn't do this kind of thing. This is breaking out of her gender role. Now, not to mention that she's breaking out of her class role, right? Aristocrats weren't supposed to work. She's not supposed to be a merchant. But she's also breaking the gender rules because it's not women don't run shops. They can be a seamstress or they can be a nursemaid or something of that nature, but they don't run businesses. So she's breaking lots of rules here. We return to the elderly maiden. She at length withdrew her eyes from the dark countenance of the colonel's portrait, heaved a sigh indeed, her breast was a very cave of Oelis that morning, and stepped across the room on tiptoe, as is the customary gait of elderly women. Okay, I'm going to pause it right there because I'm pretty sure it's been almost 40 minutes. We will stop at this moment. I will pick this back up in the next video, if I can get there. I'm going to stop it. Or not. There we go.